I don't care. Okay. That's for fun. This is purposes.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Marianne, and I'm the general manager at City Bookshop. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, whether you're here in person or online. And I wanted to check who's been here before. Bunch of people. Amazing. Who's here for the first time? Also a bunch of people. I love it. Well, whether you are joining us for the first time or returning, we are so glad to see you. We always have something going on at the shop, whether it's an author event or one of our 14 book clubs. If you're here tonight, you might be interested in checking out our Stranger Than Fiction or Social Justice book clubs. You can find all the details about those on our website, eastcitybookshop.com. Tonight, we are here to hear about Little Bosses Everywhere, a groundbreaking work of history and reportage that unveils the stranger than fiction world of multi-level marketing, a massive money-making scam and radical political conspiracy that has remade American society. Here to discuss the book are the author, Bridget Read, in conversation with Rebecca Traister. Yay! Before I give them their full introductions, a few quick housekeeping notes. If you can take a moment to silence any devices, we would appreciate it. We'll have a discussion of the book with time for questions from the audience, both in person and online. If you'd like to submit any questions online, you can do so using Zoom's Q&A feature. If you need a restroom, they're located upstairs past the cash register. Most important of all, if you need to purchase a copy of Bridget or Rebecca's books, they are available upstairs at the register. Also on our website, and we can ship pretty much anywhere. Now, for introductions, Bridget Read is a features writer at New York Magazine, reporting on housing inequality and the real estate industry for Curbed. Previously, she wrote for The Cut and was a culture writer at Vogue. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. In conversation with her is Rebecca Traister, a writer at large at New York Magazine, where she covers politics, media, and culture from a feminist perspective. Traister has written for The New Republic, Salon, The New York Times Magazine, The Nation, The Washington Post, Elle, and other publications. Traister is the author of Good and Mad, a New York Times bestseller, and among the Washington Post and People's 10 Best Books of 2018, All the Single Ladies, a New York Times bestseller and notable book of 2016, and Big Girls Don't Cry, a Times notable book of 2010. She's at work on a new book. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Bridget and Rebecca.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to see all of you here. You are all both smart and lucky to be here. I don't know how many of you have already read this book, but it is such an extraordinary treat. I just cannot say enough good about it. I love Bridget. She and I have been colleagues for a long time, friends for a long time. But when she wrote this book, and she first gave it to me to read, I was like, I don't know from multi-level marketing. I don't know that I'm your ideal reader for this book. This is a lot of stuff that is well outside my realm of comprehension. And then I opened it and I started reading it. It is, first of all, just beautifully constructed. so compellingly told. And when it got reviewed in the New York Times, it was a brilliant review in the New York Times, which you do not always get if you are an author. And what she wrote was that it reads like a thriller as it investigates the birth and growth of this shadowy and sprawling industry. And I cannot emphasize enough how completely on the mark that review is, because this is a book that if you think you like, as I did when she first handed it to me, thought I'm not going to understand this. No, no, no. This is a story of America. It is a story of power, of capitalism, of our institutions, of our self image. Um, it is about gender and inequality and the brokenness of the systems on which we have built this nation, which we are now trying to preserve. So, um, you're all really smart to be here for this book and this talk. And I have to say something in advance, which is the reason I don't live in DC. And in fact, now I live in Maine and I'm not here as often as I used to be. And the reason I am here this week is because I am a parent chaperone on an 8th grade trip. And I need to say that in advance because I've been here since Monday. This is the first time I've spoken exclusively with adults in 5 days. And I need to say that if I start slowly explaining how Congress works or yell at someone for chewing gum or not having good posture, please forgive me. I'm going to try to conduct this conversation like a full grown human.
You're a very good friend.
And and I am going to start by actually asking you to do an explanation beginning with Amway. Because one of the points that Bridget makes in this book is probably a lot of you, and I don't know how many of you may be experts in multi-level marketing, and that is in fact why you are here. But I bet that a lot of you are not. And if that is the case, I bet a lot of you have heard of Amway or have heard of, say, Betsy DeVos. Um, but I wonder, and it's a point that Bridget makes in the book, how many of you could explain what Amway is or does? And I think the key to that gets us to one of the greatest things about Little Bosses Everywhere, which is it begins to explain what the hell multi-level marketing is. And so could you tell us what Amway is and in doing that explain this shape and this system that is a key to the story of America?
Sure.
Yeah.
And thank you from me specifically for being here at the end of your chaperoning trip. And thank you for chaperoning me. Okay, so the way Amway works is ostensibly it is a collection of one would think they were wholesalers because they're buying products at a discount and selling them at a higher price for a profit. That's the core part one of the business. And the products in Amway are everything. Amway started with a liquid detergent in the 1950s and 60s, but they expanded to everything under the sun. They have a toothpaste called Glister. They have an energy drink called XS. They have makeup called Artistry, and you've never heard of them or seen them in a store. And why that is because the second part of the Amway business is the Amway opportunity. And so not only can you buy those products and sell them, but what you can do is bring people with you on your team. You can recruit them into what's called your downline to also buy and sell products. And you can make money as big as you grow your team. And that's the very basics of Amway. But the thing that one really needs to understand about how it works is that all that matters is part two. No one tracks products that are actually sold in Amway or in any multi-level marketing company. All that matters is what people buy. So it's a giant group of people buying products and bringing people on, inducing them to buy products. And the more people buy from the company, the bigger a cut they get of their commissions, which are basically refunds.
And to be clear, the people buying from the company doesn't necessarily mean the consumers who use the product. It is the people buying to then sell the product.
That's right.
And that the word sales, this is also fascinating. When this industry reports its sales, what does that mean?
purchases, the opposite of sales. Right. So it's really hard to understand, which is a huge part of why multiple marketing has persisted for so long, because it's dressed up in all these euphemisms and lies, you know, to call purchases sales is a lie, but the way they explain it is these are hypothetical sales, right? Because people buy the products and they in theory could sell them and make a profit, and so they basically use that estimate, which they literally call retail sales, and that's how they say it's a $40 billion industry or whatever figure they're using that year. But all they really know is how much this group of people is buying, and make getting other people to buy.
And there is no industry tracking that tells us how many people use Glister toothpaste. Is that correct? Like, we just don't know.
No, who really buy it as a retail customer?
To use it. Right.
No. And if I had to guess, it would be very few.
Poor people. Poor people.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you know, my dad, for example, was just talking to someone who's has a Mary Kay. He's like, my wife buys Mary Kay products, and she always has, and she has for years. Mary Kay is another MLM. And there are some people like that. You know, you'll find on a forum I've used SA8, which is Amway's liquid detergent. I've used it for 40 years. My mom used it. You know, so they exist, but there's no retail market. It's not a real market.
The Avon product, when I was a child, Avon is also one of these companies. And when I was a child, and some of you may remember this too, there was an Avon Skin So Soft that was a product that was theoretically a cosmetic Avon product, but in fact was used as a very effective mosquito repellent. And I knew a lot of people, including my neighbors, who had Skin So Soft to repel bugs. So that's the singular, that and Tupperware, right? There are other companies that we recognize, but really much of this product, it is just a people. So is there any difference between an MLM and what we would think of as a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme?
So that's another way that we, even asking that question, this is what's so insidious about the whole thing, is even asking that question, which is a well-meaning question of like, is this a scam, to set up MLM and pyramid schemes as if they're two different things, buys into the industry narrative that has been around for so long, which does set them up as two. Like, is it possible to do ethical multi-level marketing and then some veer into pyramid schemes, when what's actually the case, and what I lay out in the book, is that they come from the same place. The guys that invented multi-level marketing also invented the pyramid scheme. The companies that, the reason we have the term pyramid scheme, which comes from in the 70s when the FTC actually shuts down some companies for the first time using this method, and we get the moniker pyramid scheme. Those guys come from the same place that the legitimate multi-level marketing companies, Amway, Mary Kay, Herbalife, we could go on and on, they do. So my book argues that there really is no functional difference. There's no proven industry called multi-level marketing that doesn't operate like a pyramid scheme. In fact, there's decades and decades of evidence that they're the same thing.
So one of the things that struck me, and why I said at the beginning that to me this was such a story of this country and its history and its self-image, one of the things that Bridget described so beautifully is how tied in this is to a sense of something fundamentally American, going back to the idea of the Yankee peddler, right? And of course, because this country was built on capitalist systems, on buying and selling, including of human beings, which, you know, this is all part of our national psyche, and the notion of the encyclopedia salesman, the knife salesman, the door-to-door Bible salesman. It's this direct going, knocking on a door within your community to sell something. And it's this very American mythos of, Arthur Miller, Death of a Salesman. But one of the things that's so fascinating is that the way that myth is spun for us so often, it's very often a male myth, right? Like it's a dude. But of course, some of the best known MLMs are Avon, are Mary Kay, are Tupperware. And part of this book is about what is the draw for women, and how does this wind insidiously around gender inequities that are also foundational to how this country's capitalist systems work? Tell us about the ladies.
So when multi-level marketing was invented, it was invented by men, two failed salesmen and basically grifters, one of whom was a practicing eugenicist, a prominent psychologist who studied at Stanford with Lewis Terman, who's a prominent American eugenicist who invented the IQ test. So this is a person who, bought into an ideology that certain characteristics are more desirable in human beings than others, and that we can weed those out and effectively manage undesirable people and make everyone else into productive, efficient humans, which I think is like a huge part of MLM's DNA, is like, how do we keep people controlled? And in hierarchies, MLM is a system of strict hierarchies. And so anyway, those guys invented MLM in the 50s in California. And the first recruits were husband and wife teams. And it was very much, this was 1945. And then throughout the 50s, it was this way of the United States had just won World War II, but we were actually in this sort of post-war anxiety moment economically. Like, we hadn't entered the sort of Eisenhower era, of abundance yet. And this was a way of bringing people into the labor market, putting them to work, but it was still quite gendered. So women could remain housewives, they could still do childcare, and they literally had a system where the men would a woman would go over to her neighbor's house when the wives are home and do the first spiel, and the man would come later at night to pick up the brochure when the husband's home. So they would the man would close and the woman would open. So it's very very much a sort of maintains the nuclear family, but allows for the shifting labor market, which already at the time had more women in it, right? Women went to work during World War II, and that was like a huge destabilizing moment. And so there was then this snapback of like, what do we do with these women that want to help and they want to bring income in? And so MLM was like very much targeted those people in that moment, and they were white aspiring classes. They were like lower middle class couples.
And I also want to talk a little bit about that moment with regard to labor history, because it's coming at a moment after the strengthening of labor protections across many industries that had omissions already around gender and race. But here's an industry that exists entirely outside of the protected industries, right? And how much does that, that figures into how this works, and it can be unfettered.
So, and going back a little bit to what you're talking about. So already door-to-door selling as it existed before multi-level marketing, before this recruitment element, which is what marks multi-level marketing from regular door-to-door selling, which of course existed in the 19th century and like the 1920s, that already was what we could call a feminized labor category. Because in the New Deal, when there was a sort of transformative moment where basically a dignified base type of living was established by things like minimum wage, by Social Security, by the payroll tax. During the New Deal, there were jobs that were left out, and one of them was door-to-door selling. And that industry actually was a huge part in why we have independent contractors who were deliberately left out of the protections of the New Deal. So door-to-door selling is already made up of workers who don't get to retire, who don't get sick, who don't have a minimum wage, and who are sort of outside this like Fordist sort of wage factory floor work, which is typified by the jobs that were protected in the New Deal. So that's in the 30s. So then when multi-level marketing is invented, it's like, actually, door-to-door selling is going to make you rich. So it's almost like a moment where we're reclaiming door-to-door selling for a more masculine, we're going to, get rich Cadillac lifestyle. And we're going to bring women in. And then, and we can talk about this unless you haven't, a question before. But then what happens is, as women continue to go into the labor market in the 60s and 70s, they're going into jobs that are also in this category. They're secretaries, they're clerks, they're doing retail, they're doing service. And those jobs are not enough. They're not making enough money. They need the flexibility because they're still doing childcare. And so MLM actually becomes, because it's already feminized, when more women go to work, more women then need MLM.
And the false promise of MLM, which is the title of the book is autonomy for women who are being denied all kinds of both protection, stability, and also so many of those professions, the secretaries, the retail, you're working for bosses, and the promise, the false promise of an MLM income is that you are your own boss.
Right. You're an independent contractor. Um, and so from the very beginning, MLM is using this category that, even though independent contractor rhetorically sounds exciting, right? You're your own boss. You keep your, whatever. You don't have someone telling you what to do, but comes out of being left out, being marginalized, right? You're an independent contractor if you don't get what full-time employees do. So it's like taking marginalization and flipping it as independence. And that very much appeals to women who are, wanting to supplement their income, wanting more security, but aren't finding the traditional paths to do so. And the labor market, the secure parts of the labor market aren't for them. And so this is a way to do that.
I want to ask about the aesthetics of it for women because and some of you who are familiar or have memories of the Avon or Mary Kay or even Tupperware, like the pinkness of it. So Bridget was talking about Cadillacs. Like, can you talk about what the aesthetics are for the especially the female coded elements of this up through some of the more contemporary ones, because we haven't even gotten to like the LuLaRoe, whatever it's called. But how that plays in because it was hyper feminized, right? It was promising autonomy, but in a very distinct aesthetic category.
Yeah. The early companies, Nutrilite, which was the first MLM, and that was a supplement company. And then Nutrilite is where the Amway founders kind of trained. And then they branched off and started Amway in Michigan. And what happened was people who learned this method, which is no different from the pyramid scheme, just fanned out and copied it all around the country. But that part of the story really hasn't been widely known for like 80 years since it started. MLM has masqueraded as this like American thing that a bunch of people came up with at the same time, almost like the internet or something, where multiple people were kind of inventing the same thing at the same time. It's this natural evolution when no, people just literally copied it. And so Mary Kay, which is the first MLM founded by a woman in 1963, and among the more important and prominent because Mary Kay still exists. Mary Kay Ash, the founder, sold memoirs that have sold all around the world, and she's very much a kind of canonical Americana figure. And for a while, people just thought that, I mean, the story just went that she was in door-to-door selling and then came up with this amazing sales method. But I was able to find in my research that her husband was just in one of these other pyramid companies, and she just learned it from him. And then he did drop dead at the breakfast table. That part of the legend is true. But anyway, so Mary Kay is really important because in the 60s, women joining this thing, I think, is what helped prolong it. Because what happens in the 60s, at the same time that she's doing her thing in Texas, Mary Kay's in Texas, the pyramid companies are getting smarter and therefore more flagrant. They're getting worse. And that's why what I referenced earlier in the 70s is when we start getting the term pyramid scheme, because this new thing, which had only been around for 20 years, regulators start catching up, and state, law enforcement, people start understanding that this is a pyramid scheme. It's a Ponzi. It's harming people, and it relies on fraud and deception, and we're shutting them down. So women being the predominant distributors in this industry by the 60s is, I think, what allows it to basically by 1979, which is when it's effectively legalized, fly under the radar, because people literally can't fathom women scamming, which is shocking because women are really good scammers. But at that point, it was still such a weird, it was almost like, they're doing something so frivolous and so silly. And so the packaging, to get all the way back around to your question, was a huge part of that, because women in these domestic spaces, door-to-door selling is very much out of a traditional retail environment. So you're at home, you're in someone's living room, and there's this air of, it's all feminized. It's very silly and light. And the idea that women were ripping each other off, it was almost unfathomable. And very quickly the industry also is touting itself as a place where women can feel empowered, but are also conservative socially and politically. So they're not threatening anyone. And, we have the women's movement and, the feminist movement happening at the same time. So this is a way that's like, we put women to work, we help them feel independent, but they still cook for their husbands and they wear pink and we're not doing anything threatening.
Right. It's crucial that all this has to exist within the ability to stay within your domestic sphere, right? With it, that you do not have to go to an office, that you do not go to a factory, that you do not travel, that this is within your community and frankly within your home in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, that's very much explicitly the pitch and always has been. And women becoming the predominant face of this industry, and then Amway, which was not as it was more masculine, but it was very much Christian and conservative, and so they had their own thing going. But the combination of the Amway guys and the women in these companies that came up were what helped sell it and make it seem non-threatening, and then just sell the story that this was lifting up the Americans who needed it, Americans who weren't part of that traditional labor force.
And so I want to talk a little bit about how this industry is tied right up with political power and the building of political power and the building of the new right and then where we are now. So can you talk a little bit about the history of this industry and the money made from it and its undergirding ideology and how that corresponds with the creation of what became a contemporary right wing, at least until very recently?
Yeah, so Amway, Rebecca mentioned Betsy DeVos earlier, and if you don't know, Betsy DeVos, her husband is Dick DeVos, who is the son of one of the Amway founders, and they grew up in the same part of West Michigan, where Amway is still headquartered, and Amway is by far the most politically influential and dominant company, but not the only one. Mary Kay Ash also became politically active and, campaigned against the Equal Rights Amendment sort of surreptitiously. And so, but Amway by far, because the Amway founders amassed a huge fortune. They, when they died, they were, 5 billion, 10 billion, like they're billionaires. And they have funneled their money since the 70s into places like the Heritage Foundation, which they helped establish, into the Council for National Policy. So all these dark money right wing groups. Also, the Acton Institute. So that's like evangelical, conservative and anti-choice groups. And then, now they're doing things like all that money goes into Trump's sheriff training program, which is essentially training sheriffs around the country to basically act as ICE agent defenders. And so that's Amway. But they, there are many more of them who act through their lobbying group, the Direct Selling Association. And those lobbyists give bipartisan donations. So they actually also, it's very much a right wing group. And the Amway founders in particular were instrumental in donating to Ronald Reagan. Already in the 70s, they were the biggest funders to the Republican Party. But they, don't limit themselves to the right wing. And by the 90s, you have Bill Clinton recording a video for the Direct Selling Association to be sent to every multi-level marketer in the country saying this is an American industry. So it knows no, they don't play favorites. Whoever will work for them.
Whoever's in power. So in terms of our current political situation, you have been researching, reporting, writing this book for several years. You do not know when you are writing a book, the political climate in which it is going to be published. And boy, do you have a political climate right now. And so I want to ask a little bit about, because this is such a story for our moment. I mean, it's a story that extends back decades and centuries, but it is also really about the forces at work right now. Can you talk about what it's been like to publish in this climate and amidst these headlines, and in terms of what's happening at the FTC, and in terms of all kinds of the decimation of whatever labor protections are left, and what, all of what's happening now, and how how this story is central to it.
Yeah, so the book ends, but I shouldn't give it away. Spoiler alert.
It really, I mean, it really, really does build. So it's you.
Well, the Heritage Foundation is the vehicle for the DeVos family. That is where the DeVos and Van Andels is actually what I should say. So the other family, not the DeVosses, but the Van Andels, that Barb Van Andel Gabby, who's the daughter of Jay Van Andel, one of the Amway founders, is the current chair of the board of Heritage, and that is truly where they, when she inducted Kevin Roberts, who is the current president, he's a historian and he's the author. He wrote the introduction to the Heritage, or to the Project 2025. She literally said he is going to increase our influence on Capitol Hill. Like, they're very explicit that Project 2025 is their vision, and the number one directive, in addition to all kinds of, they have very much a social program, right, and a natalist program. They want to encourage the birth rate. They have all these many ideas, many scary ideas.
Straight white Christian capitalist patriarchy.
Yes, very Judeo-Christian values and all that stuff. But they, it's deregulation is the way they're going to accomplish that. They want very, very little oversight on what happens in private companies and very low taxes, so that we're not there's a lot of incentive to make a lot of money in those private companies because you can hang on to it. And they've been doing all kinds of during Trump 1. They helped push him to pass a bunch of very favorable tax legislation, which they'll do again this round. So that's the name of the game for them. And that's really like the long project of MLM they've been doing that since deregulation was much more fringe, right? So MLM is really like the ideological vehicle, grassroots movement that helped make those ideas the extreme deregulatory agenda of, people that want to get rid of Social Security, people that want to have work requirements for Medicare and Medicaid, like we're literally reading about right now, people who want to dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Already happened, right? That consumer welfare, many, and you could say what's ironic for people on the left, not to out myself as a person on the left, but these are things that always were imperfect for us, right? Like, none of these programs were ever catch-alls, but the idea that we don't have them at all.
Right, you find yourself defending things that in fact were,
right. I simply love the payroll tax. Right.
Yeah, no, this is the story of being on the left,
right,
in a lot of realms.
Right. But and for many Republicans and many conservatives, that has never been, and that's where we get never Trump conservatives, or people that are like, whoa, that was not a mainstream Republican Party position for a long time, and now very much is. And we have a Republican president who this is his agenda, is to tear things up, and Doge being, the DeVos family gave to Elon Musk's PAC. So like, they're very much doing this all together. Anyway, so I really forget your question.
But I think you were answering it. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Doge specifically. I mean, in terms of what they're just going in with they're doing. This is at the behest of basically the very same people who are at the top of this.
Yeah, this is a movement of people who truly believe that government welfare turns truly believe, actually, is an interesting thing. Their ideology, their ethos is that government welfare, government programs turns people into slaves, and that the way we will be truly free and that we will truly achieve democracy is through rugged individualism, right? Through true private enterprise, through the free market, that the market is the way we're going to achieve abundance and a good life for as many people as possible. But it has this Darwinian undercurrent, because the way the market does that and meets it out is like according to your ability. If you're not doing well in this utopia they've established, it's because God literally didn't ordain you to have it, or you're not working hard enough. You're not being godly. Like, this is I'm not exaggerating. The DeVos family and the Van Andels are Calvinists. This is very much, the prosperity gospel is very literal in their religious practice. So yeah, I mean, the way that then they're carrying out that vision is through the wrecking ball of, what Doge is doing by dismantling every protection that inhibits private enterprise, that inhibits capital, that inhibits profit. Um, the idea being we're all going to be better off because we're all going to reap the rewards of this like incredibly productive society. And I think that's a lie. But that's the ethos that Trump has ridden on, and that's why Trump, is able to have this pseudo populism and this populist veneer, because it's all justified by like, if you want to be rich in this world, you're going to get rich. The only things, holding you back is you. And of course, if this is the ethos of a bunch of scammers who lie constantly and their business revolves around lying, we start to see that ethos, that ideology, that promise is potentially, we're being duped, we're being scammed.
So it's funny, when your book was published and I started seeing people yell about it, and I kept seeing that the DSA was really mad, I was like, I would think the DSA would be really into this. But the DSA is, in fact, both the Democratic Socialists of America, who I think probably would be really into this, and the Direct Sellers Association. So how is the industry, like, what kind of pushback have you gotten from the industry itself? And also, I'm really curious, working in a political media where I think this is absolutely central. This kind of history, ideas, examination of our systems is central to thinking about where we go from here. I'm really curious as to how this is fitting into a conversation that's happening on the left, which to me seems to be in its own way about deregulation, regress, and Joe Biden's cancer. So I'm curious about like what reaction has been from right and from a liberal world in terms of the reception of this book.
Well, on the industry itself is like a fake industry. Just so everyone is clear, like these people don't act like real lobbyists or real industry. Like they don't have real comms, like, because they're scams. Like, so we submitted fact checking questions and we did all of our like what journalists do, and nobody replied. It's not like we had a really intense fact checking process, because they have nothing to say. And they did release a statement that essentially said fake news, she's going after the small entrepreneur. They had no counterclaims whatsoever to the claims in the book, and like my sort of feelings about the larger kind of story this tells about the United States and where we're going, like above all, they just didn't have any evidence that they weren't scams. Like whatever I think about all my politics, they didn't have anything to say.
There was nothing factually wrong in this
no
book.
and no corrections, no anything like that. And I wrote a op-ed in The Nation that's based on a lot of the reporting in the book. No corrections, no anything like that. And so yeah, I mean, it's been crickets from them. But on the left, I mean, I think that we have some left people in this room, maybe. I think what's interesting about MLM is that, like, yes, it is a right wing story, and this like right wing fringe, this very particular, very specific movement within the Republican Party, reactionary part of it. But like I was saying earlier, it has persisted through many Democratic presidents. It exists in every state, New York City. It's everywhere. And so there really is also a question that the book tries to answer, which is like, why haven't we done anything about this? Even people who would presumably be against scams, many of whom are Republicans. Like that's the other thing, is like a lot of politicians want to be against scams. And when the consumer protection movement really took off in the 60s and 70s, many of those were Republican presidents, politicians. President Nixon was a huge part of why we have many consumer laws. So it's not really a right or left thing. But what MLM has done and what the story of the book tries to tell is it came out of a moment where already this idea that we were going to have American dominance and what that means for the country and the planet was like a question and a source of anxiety. And MLM comes at every moment where yet again that anxiety rears its head, and that tends to happen in an economic crisis. So MLM is the propaganda that comes out when we have a crash, and that is what it has historically done. So in the 70s, when inflation was raging, MLM burst, into across the country. I mean, 1 in 8 Americans was doing multi-level marketing at one point, according to the industry. And then again, dot-com boom, Great Recession. That's when Trump it becomes the face of his multi-level marketing company and literally is offering it as like a way to survive the recession. And white collar employees who've lost their jobs, you can do this too. It's not just for people who are sort of below you on the economic rung. And then in the pandemic, that is exactly what happened again. So like there's something that MLM offers society at large here, that is useful to our legitimate economy too, to legitimate businesses, to legitimate politicians, people who want us to continue to believe in the American project and American style capitalism and what we, the way that we've organized society around profit, and that is sort of the way we're going to continue to live. There is something very politically, socially useful to all kinds of powerful people about telling that story every time people start to freak out and say, well, wait, like, am I being exploited here? Like, is this system really working for me? And that the answers to those questions might start to change. MLM has, truly goes in people's hearts and minds and says, no, turn inward, keep going, work harder. Your next hack, you'll have an amazing business idea and you'll survive that way. And, just keep going. Don't look and don't organize, truly. Don't sort of like pick your head up.
Don't seek coalition.
Yes.
Don't seek coalition
Yeah.
or protection or.
Yes. And MLM really literally on a base level, the way an MLM grows exponentially, it's like we can just keep growing. There's no need to stop growth. There's no need for redistribution, right? The programs that they're dismantling, those are redistributive programs. Those are programs that take profits and they give them to people that need them. And truly, we all then instead have our eyes on this ever growing mountain of future prosperity, and we never pause, basically.
And in which the cover's so great because in which you're building it on other people, on the exploitation of other people.
Yeah, only in America, if you're at the bottom, if you work at a company like the Amway people have a yacht and an island called Peter Island somewhere in the Caribbean, and it's like if you're a broke college kid working for Amway and you're spending $400 a month on products, which is what they encourage you to do, and there's someone in my book who does that, and she's literally working as a waitress and putting all her money back into Amway, and then you find out that the founders of the company have a yacht. You're not supposed to look at the yacht and get angry and start to say why. You are supposed to concentrate on building your own Amway under you and that you will have a yacht one day. And like that really is quite a useful thing to have literally have someone sort of that be the horizon of their sort of what they do, how they sublimate that anger or that sense of injustice. And it really has just long been a tool to sublimate unrest. And the guys who invented it were experiencing unrest. They were broke and it wasn't working out for them. They had education. So they did it to sort of deal with the way that the American dream was not working, so it really is a tool.
We want to turn to audience questions now. Do people have them? Yes.
So, as you've been talking, and I've read part of the book too, audiobook. I also read another recently published book that was about how Puritan principles continue to impact America. And so, as you were talking, there's a lot of things that were like pinging in my brain from that book as well as your book. And I also watch a lot of anti-home content, so I've seen some of your interviews.
Great.
And so I was thinking about like things like how work is godly. So like fit it into the pockets of your day, i.e. work all the time, or anti-intellectualism. Oh, you don't have to know this. Like the body fitness coaches, the Optavia weight loss coaches, and as the last part I listened to right before coming over here was Monique being a beauty consultant, but not being able to answer makeup questions at Target, and calling back to your like after MLM interview and vitamins and stuff of controlling nature. And so, no, you don't need to eat real food. Have a supplement. You talk about how that plays out. You kind of touched on some of that with Doge and the government thing, but how that plays out at the more like the bottom level of things and how that's used to control and like play on that very deep, like pervasive and American ideals of this is what you do.
I'm supposed to repeat questions for the virtual audience, and I'm going to do my damnedest, and please correct me as I go. So this question was about from somebody in the audience who's partway through Bridget's book and has also just read a book about Puritan values and the foundational ideas of the country and the notion that you work all the time and that there's some level of self-deprivation and that you're supposed to do all the things for self-perfection in little pockets of time that we know don't really exist, and that it's all about sort of self-denial, constant work, and that these have been the messages that have been embedded in our culture and self-image since the founding. Is that a fair appraisal of what you said? And she wants Bridget to speak about how that plays out for those who are at the bottom of the bottom rungs of these economic and social structures.
Oh boy. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason that the first multi-level marketing company was selling vitamins, right? Because it was was very much about the self and about self-improvement. Also, vitamins were very new and they were very unregulated. So it was a industry that they could get in on, and the FDA was still sort of trying to figure out what to do with vitamins. And so it was like it's an unregulated industry of independent contractors, and they're selling a very unregulated product. But I think the reason that again, it really is like a story about always sort of going back to the self, and the self as the like unit of progress rather than collective progress. And so at the time, like I think vitamins married really well with that prosperity gospel and the Protestant work ethic. That concept that Max Weber coined was actually about Calvinists. So when he came to the United States from Germany, he was observing literally the Calvinist Christians who were in Michigan, where the DeVos family was raised. So like the canonical the story they tell, the little meet cute, the Amway founders, is that they were in high school in Michigan and one of them needed a ride to school in like the bitter cold, and the other one charged him like 50 cents or whatever. And then he eventually found out that he was charging everyone. So this guy, he had one, I forget who charged who, but that idea that like that's ingenious and not weird, that like you're charging your friend, and that we should all be like, what a cute story, that it's like, just give the guy a ride, like you're weird, anyway. But that really is illustrative of the Protestant work ethic as they see it, because it's very financial. It's always been about wealth and accumulating money, and so that very much infuses multi-level marketing and how it has trickled down to those bottom ranks. And the other kind of side of that, a constant drumming of how to be better and how to be, that any of your problems can be solved by yourself, that becomes very coercive. And so that's why multiple marketing companies have been compared to cults, because the tactics are extremely coercive. They tell you don't read the newspaper, don't read the internet, don't listen to haters. You're supposed to be this woman in my book, the college student, literally on the way to work, she's supposed to listen to podcasts. Then she gets to work, she's supposed to find 5 people to warm chat, which is like on her work break at this restaurant, go out and talk about Amway products. Then at night she's reading, right? So it's like very much coercive, because it has to be, because the work, I mean, is so, like, you're not making any money, you're spending money. It doesn't make any sense, and nobody profits. And so the only way, it is like being in a cult, because you're suffering. And how do you stay in it? Well, you have to constantly be being told that it's for some greater purpose. So, the self, and like, I think wellness and all that, the self-flagellating we all do in, when we're being at, the receiving end of the wellness industry, and like how we can always be better every day. So that has obviously seeped into wider culture, but in MLM, truly, that is very much it. Again, it's how people stop from pausing and starting to think about what's happening to them. And there's actually a rule called, no cross lining. You actually are not allowed to talk to somebody who's at your same level in the MLM. You can only talk to your upline. So you have no one to complain about and say, hey, why am I spending $400 a month on products that I could get for half the price at Costco? Like, it literally makes no sense. Oh, wow.
I'm starting. Oh,
Sure, it's a quick one. So you don't have to give away all your secrets, but I guess just in terms of sourcing, I'm curious how you went about cultivating sources, and if people were indeed, like, if you were talking to people who are in the midst of this, who have like a spark of skepticism, and like that's why they're talking to you, or you're talking to people who are fully all in, and if that evolved over the reporting process.
I got to restate the
yeah.
question. So the question was about how Bridget found sources and spoke to them, especially given the risks and the sort of threats within the industry about don't talk about the industry, what stays in the, what happens in the industry stays in the industry, and what the process of sourcing was like for you.
Definitely a very fruitful territory. Of people who have left multiple marketing, and that's like a very crucial, it's called the anti-MLM movement for some. But again, this is an industry that's 80 years old, so people have been leaving and talking about multiple marketing from the 60s. And if you look in old newspaper coverage, for example, local news in every state in the country was talking about these companies for far back. So there's just so much evidence, which is like quite depressing when you look at it, because it's not like I sort of wrote in and like exposed something that had never been talked about. It's the opposite, right? There really just wasn't a definitive mainstream sort of outsiders book on this subject, but there are lots of, so there's those people. Then there are the experts who are part of this, movement to rein them in. And it's a small movement, but many of those people are in law enforcement, in state AG's offices, in the FTC. Like, it's a small, it's like a niche interest, so that's, the government side. And then, people who were, I tried to find people who were sort of dipping a toe in leaving, because then they were open to talking. So that's like Monique, whose story sort of is the scaffolding in the book. But then I really did want to talk to people who are still deep in, and that's why I went to a Mary Kay convention at the end of the book. And that was because those are closed events. You really have to be a distributor, and so it is really hard to talk to people who are still in it. Like, all of those, for all those reasons I mentioned, it is culty, and they tell you don't talk to anybody. So that was really important to like see it up front. And then I was able to talk to some people, a small handful, who did work in the corporate companies. So that's another thing that felt important, because there's a lot of attention on distributors, but they're all independent contractors, even the biggest ones with the biggest downlines. And these are, this is in the book, but you know, some of them have been around since the 60s. And so they're literally like LLCs. If you, I think it's like a security because you just get an investment position and now you're just reaping from this, your place in the, you just bought into your place in the hierarchy. But anyway, and their kids run, they are dynasties. They're like little nobilities. It's crazy. But anyway, so trying to find some people who'd like actually worked in the corporate side of the companies, and there are a few in there. But you know, those people, they're like whistleblowers. So that's a really hard group of people.
Okay, we're gonna go sort of front to back.
Thing I'm sort of curious about, and I don't know if it really, I don't know how wide a scope your book really gets at it, but the kind of class differences with different MLMs. So like there's like I remember growing up, my mom would like poo-pooed friends that sold Amway, but we totally went to a Pampered Chef.
Oh, yeah.
It's like
Right.
so
Pampered Chef is owned by Warren Buffett. So that's definitely the classiest one by far.
you know, but it's still an MLM, right? So like there's these different types of MLMs and they attract different kinds of people. And I'm just sort of curious about that.
So that question was about the class differences between MLMs and how the questioner's mother used to poo-poo Amway salespeople and yet take her to Pampered Chef parties. And what are the sort of hierarchies class-wise between these companies?
I mean, there are like between 700 and 1,000 MLMs in the United States at any point, and that could be low, right? Like they start them all the time and they have different levels of sophistication. So there was no way I was going to name them. And like now in promoting the book, every day someone has asked me about a different one that, you know, I didn't know about or I couldn't put in the book. So there are so many. But yeah, I mean, I think that at different times, different MLMs have tried to appeal to different demographics. Because it is this, it's a boilerplate. It's just a type of fraud. So it's like whoever you want to appeal to with your fraud is how you can, you can just market it to a different group. So yeah, there's lots of kinds. And I think, now with anti-MLM and with Google and just the way that you can like quickly access what MLM is, I think in the 90s and 2000s, it was just a lot easier to say, oh, Amway, Pampered Chef isn't Amway, because it was just harder to look up that information and to understand just what multi-level marketing was. And, some say network marketing, some say direct selling. So now there's even more of a sort of attempt to differentiate. Like we do social selling, we do affiliate, whatever. So they're very good at that, at saying we're different. I mean, Amway ran ads in the 70s when these other companies were getting shut down that said, it's a different world, that they've always been doing that.
Yes.
The world in which you get the MLM structure, where women can have economic opportunity within this model, or if it's just inherent.
The question is, do you think there is some ideal model in which an MLM structure could function with proper guardrails and regulations, and in which women in particular could participate in this without being scammed or becoming scammers?
No, no, I really don't think so. I think that, I mean, from the beginning, they were open that it was a system in which people are rewarded based on how many people they're recruiting, not on the retail sales. And that is literally how we define a pyramid scheme now through, the legal precedent, which is called the Coscott precedent. That is what it is. So we actually have a law that is, that should already enforce pyramid MLMs out of existence, but they just lie, and we don't have real oversight. So no, I think either like if there was actual enforcement, I think every single one would collapse because no one would make any money, because the way they make money is through lying to people and fraud, or if there really was, if there was actual legislation, if there was a real like a pyramid ban, then they would also collapse because they, would not, all of their practices would be regulated again out of existence. So no, I don't think so.
Have you learned anything surprising since the book was published?
Oh, well, I was telling Rebecca just today that like every day there's something that, the Doge creep is like happening at the FTC. And so, the book ends with some regulatory movement, and some kind of hope, for some progress there that was obviously before the results of the election. And I think that the fate of that is hanging in the balance, and that has gotten quite darker than when I finished the book. So that's that stuff is changing every day, but that's probably the most recent. I mean, and then they would literally want to get rid of FTC employees. They want to make the agency smaller. So like, yeah, I mean the capacity already that they have for dealing with the consumer issues that even outside of MLM, right? Just the scams are exploding, and they're not able to deal with them already.
Yes.
How are MLMs evolving in terms of sort of the traditional players and
How are MLMs evolving in the digital age with regard to both traditional players and some new people coming into the industry?
Um, well, it for many many years, MLMs like lagged behind. Like Amway didn't have a website until the late '90s, and they rebranded to a company called Quickstar, which they then reverted because it was stupid. But all that did was it just meant that you weren't like physically buying products from your sponsor, because you did used to have to actually go to someone's house and like buy your products, and that's why people's garages were full of products, and they still are, but they bypass that, and you just order it online. And what remains is who you're ordering it from. So that downline is really, really important information. And so all of that has just moved online. So like when I was able to get into a few distributors, they're like back office. So like the website that the company gives them, you can actually see and click through their downline. So it's now become this like digital family tree, which is sort of interesting because I actually think there's some fruitful territory there for a criminal, for law, for a case, right? Because it's all laid out. Like there has to be some record of it anyway. But the real thing is social media has made the lying that involves MLM promotion very, very easy. So like in the 70s, you would have to pretend, maybe I'll do some recruiting in front of a country club and pretend that I'm a member of the country club. Now you can just go, you can fake your background even. You don't even have to actually go to like, or you could go to a house, rent a house a day, shoot a day of content and use it for a month and make it seem like you're always on vacation, right? Like social media has made it very easy to do the lifestyle promotion that is required to get people into multi-level marketing and making people think you're successful. And I think it's just made all of us like selling stuff normalized. Like the idea that you get on and you do a front facing video about like a product is not weird, and it's not weird to see your friends doing it. And I think unfortunately that has really normalized the idea that it's like normal to sell to your friends and family, and that we're all sort of a personal brand. And so they do like really get away, I think, much more easily now with that. Whereas it was weird when your Amway guy came to your door. It's like, oh my God, that guy again coming here to like sell me toothpaste, which I buy from the store like a normal person. Now it's like, oh, she's on here talking about her like shampoo and how it enables her to work from Wi-Fi. And it's like we have this language for that. And I think that's a huge problem.
Okay, I'm hearing we got time for two more questions. One of them is a virtual question.
Is it harder for people to get scammed or easier because a charismatic figure might have wider reach online?
Is it harder to get scammed or easier because a charismatic figure might have extra reach online?
Well, I think the extra reach online does mean that, like, for example, if it gets picked up by the anti-MLM, like YouTubers, like they will go after you immediately, and start literally just like changing the SEO around your name, if they Google your company or if they Google the head of the company. So like on some level, I think it's easier. I don't know. I think there's just online is really also quite fragmented. And so sometimes I'm surprised that people might not have heard of a specific MLM or scam, but it's like we're all in such siloed online worlds that I also think unfortunately like it's quite easy to think that you have much more reach than you do, and actually people are just not going to necessarily hear when someone's been exposed. Like I think just getting traction is harder online. Yeah.
Is there one more from the audience? Yes, you've been patiently raising your hand.
That's Mr. Sar, my 11th grade AP US history teacher.
Perfect. Okay.
Began by talking about you're on a trip with 8th graders. We actually taught Bridget in the 8th grade.
Yep. Yeah. Oh.
With the book, in fact, your introduction was perfect because the writing is compelling and the research is phenomenal. So I just want to ask you, like, why did you get into this? How did you get into this niche area that most of us have never thought about that much?
So in the most perfect final question for any book event I have ever attended, Bridget's former AP history teacher and 8th grade teacher
I forgot about that. Sorry.
is first of all confirming what a brilliant and well told story you have put on paper here. And secondly, asking, how did you come to it? How did you come to this niche area of economic, political, historical analysis?
Through an article, as one often does. No, I did a short article for New York Magazine about it. And really just none of it made sense. None of the what multi-level marketing was didn't make sense. So like as a journalist, when you're writing an article, right, you have to, do the sort of like backfill, right? Where and usually you can do a quick and dirty one for whatever industry you're doing, whether you're exposing like, I don't know, the wellness industry or like whatever you're doing, you always do the sort of survey. And it was doing the survey that was very problematic because I just didn't understand how does this work and why is it different from a pyramid scheme? And then you look up the FTC, language on it and you're like, what? This is now I'm even more confused, and so it just really piqued my curiosity. And then it really just sits at the intersection of so many things I think are really important. And primarily for me is inequality and just the persistence of inequality and the problem that we are not solving it and we don't know how to talk about it. And that there seems to be this like bleeding edge of people who think that it's everyone's fault who isn't doing well in our, who hasn't won out, and figuring out like, how to answer that question. And it just, MLM was a place where like all of these people seem to be really suffering and yet blaming themselves. And so many of them are women, obviously, which, really intersects with what I'm interested in. And so, yeah, it just was like, it feels like this nexus of so many things that are like, if we're going to make it through this sort of moment, we need to figure out what's happening here and why can't we get rid of this thing? It's like this like horrible like boil on the side of our government and of the economy. And so if we can't figure this out, how are we going to figure anything else out?
That gets to the absolute heart of it, and also to the first question about the Puritan ethos, and that boil might actually be at our core. So thank you all so much. What great questions and what amazing audience participation, including virtually. Bridget's going to be signing. Do I need to give directions about where? You're gonna, okay, there's somebody else more competent than I is going to finish this part. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. A huge thanks again to Bridget and Rebecca for being here tonight. Thank you all in person and virtually. very quickly. We'll take a couple minutes to just reset the space. If you can help us out by folding up your chairs and just putting them to the side of the room, we'll clear things out. And we can start a line kind of around the couch there. If you still need to purchase a book, you can do so upstairs or on our website. And if you would like your book signed, meet us back here in a few minutes. Thank you again and join us again soon.